Welcome back, everyone, to the Benchmark series. It's been several months since our last benchmark production, and my, how things have changed, at least from an economic perspective. Let's take a look at a few interesting things that have affected our economy and the pre-need funeral environment over the past 12 months. Number one, the Fed funds rate. Number two, the yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond. And then three, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was just passed. Well, first of all, in December of 2015, the Federal Reserve did something that they had not done for more than 9 years. They raised the Fed funds rate. For those of you who don't know what the Fed funds rate is, well, you're not alone. Most people hear it on the news because it's what's talked about all the time, but they never really understand what it is. The Fed funds rate is the interest rate used by depository institutions, banks and credit unions and such, to lend reserve cash balances to other depository institutions overnight. So essentially, it's a loan from one bank to another for less than a day. Not a month, not a week, not even a day, but overnight. I'm no financial genius, but that seems like a really short-term loan. The Fed raised the Fed funds interest rate in 2015, as I said, from a range of 0 to 0.25% to a range of 0.25% to 0.5%, still really low. Then they raised the interest rate again by 0.25% in December of 2016. But in 2017, they raised that interest rate 3 times. 0.25% each time. So now the Fed funds rate closed 2017 at 1.25% to 1.5%. Through these interest rate increases, the Fed is basically trying to say that the economy looks better, and so the economy can support higher interest rates as a means of controlling the growth of our economy. Now, you may not believe it, but that's exactly what they've said. Now here's a chart that shows the Fed funds interest rate since January of 2014. By taking a look at this chart, you would think that all interest rates must be trending up. Well, you would be wrong. Let me explain. Insurance companies, banks, and other lending institutions look at the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield as the benchmark for setting their interest rates for loans, and instead of looking really at the Fed funds interest rate. So here's what the 10-year Treasury yield has looked like since January of 2014. Let's take a look at that. From January 2012 through 2013, yields were really looking up. Now, but as the chart indicates, the yield hit a whopping 3% by January of 2014. Happy days, we're here again, huh? But since the beginning of 2014, the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield has been falling. Take a look at July of 2016. The yield hit a record low of 1.38%. In November of 2016, something happened. A new president was unexpectedly elected, and interest rates shot up quickly. Now, since the election, yields have stayed in a pretty tight range between 2.2% and 2.5%. So even though the Federal Reserve has tried to influence interest rates upward by increasing the Fed funds interest rate, the market as a whole has not responded in kind. Believe it or not, though, I do have some good news on the interest rate front. Yields may be increasing now that the Congress has passed and the President has signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Lowering the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21% should stimulate the economy and cause more businesses to borrow money for expansion. Now you might be wondering, how does all of this interest rate mess and the lowering of corporate tax rates really affect me? Well, here's one way. Since the corporate tax rate was cut and since interest rates moved up a bit at the end of 2017, FDIC did not have to make any growth rate adjustments to our products. This is great news for funeral homes and great news for our pre-need funeral purchasers. Now, the next 12 months should be really interesting. I can't wait to see what happens. Let's watch and see what interest rates do, and maybe more importantly, Let's watch and see what the effect of the tax cuts will be on the U.S. economy. Personally, though, I'm feeling pretty good about the future. Now, what I'd like for you to do is let us know what you think in the comments section. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.